And now we're back up to the turn of the century. 20 years ago, in 1998, this university opened. And within that, there was a little school which we called Konst och Kommunikation, the School of Arts and Communication. So and I call this a second design turn, because now co-design or participatory design is moving closer to the design schools and trying to become a kind of design school itself. So 20 years ago, we opened the school over there. And we did that with what we called a Manifesto for a digital Bauhaus. The idea that we had for a contemporary design school focused on co-design was that, you remember, around the turn of the century, there was a big hype around IT. IT was a solution to everything, and everyone with a great idea could start a company, and you could solve every problem. We had Birgersson, who had the company Framfab, which grew tremendously, and he was mingling with all the investors in the world on how to build the future. And his vision, as he called it at that time, was Folkhemmet 2.0. So we're going to build the new Folkhemmet, which was the basis, you could say, of the welfare state, which design tried to expand upon in the 70s. But our vision was very different. We were saying that we need to learn from what has happened with the Bauhaus and onwards, that there's too strong focus on technology, a too strong focus on quick returns of investment may lead to something which is very counter to what was up. So we said we try to learn from the Bauhaus on how to unite art and technology and do things for social change. We said that we try to learn from the Scandinavian or Nordic design tradition of designing everyday products for everyone, but knowing about the problem of the elitism in that project. And we tried to say that maybe this should move much more clearly away from computer science and informatics departments and so into being a real design school together with other design schools. And so we had two main subjects, and you still see them in here. One was interaction design, and the other one was media and communication studies. There were also other things like stage production, etc. So here now design has, or co-design has really spread all over Scandinavia, but maybe, at least if you look at international recognition, Malmö more and more turned out to be the hub. People wanted to go to Malmö to be part of the co-design adventure. And you should also say here is the time when you got this Mac, the designed Mac, and you got the first little thing to have music on. And I think this is a playlist. So this is a kind of iTunes, I think. So that's about the time when these things comes out. Here are students doing the same exercise as you did on the first day there, that you did the other day. And here's an example for how the studios could look at the school. Some things happened in the school, in the studios. We had quite a nice studio space, I must say, at that time. We don't have quite that studio space these days. And something happened out in the street, of course. And the projects in the beginning, I give one example of an early project that the students started. So I'll take it from the students' perspective. Here were two students, Per-Anders Hillgren and Erling Björvinsson. They were working together with nurses at the intensive care unit. When they came there, they did all the traditional methods for for co-design with mock-ups and games, and it ended up with, it turned out that they were very interested in informal learning. That turned to be an issue that was very important there. At that time, that came up something that was called a personal digital assistant, on which you could actually download films, film clips, and see them. So the long story, what came from a really interesting co-design process was a system where nurses and other staff would work with, for instance, how to operate, say, that machine. And sometimes there's a membrane in it that doesn't work. And there are manuals that tells you how to do, but not everyone knows how to do it, even if you're formally supposed to do it. So what they do is that a colleague they make a little movie of, say, 2 minutes to explain how to change that membrane. Or it could be change bandage, or it could be all kinds of different things. There were 200 such films. And then a film is made, and then it goes to a board with the doctors and the nurses, and it's approved or not approved. And if it's not approved, it may be changed. Or when they're approved, it's uploaded to a server. And then to this PDA, there was linked a barcode reader. That was also very advanced at that time. And there would be barcodes on these machines or in different shelves, etc. So you took this PDA and you read the barcode, and you would get colleagues who explained how. So here she's sitting looking at the PDA, how to change that membrane down there. So it was a typical traditional participatory design project, and brag a little bit about it. It received something called the Users Award, which is the prize for the seen from the user's point of view best application in Sweden that year. Even more interesting from a co-design perspective is that when the prize was delivered, Erling and Per-Anders, they were not in Stockholm, they were here in Malmö, and they were the nurses themselves who were the recipients of the prize. So as time went on, there were a number of research centers. We had one with the Interactive Institute, and later on, for instance, one with Medea, which is not the same Medea as we're having today. Many of the students here kept on and actually did a PhD, and in which in many ways forms the new directions of co-design as we say, trying to meet new challenges. So if we look at the knowledge regime behind now, when we're coming into the turn of the century, it's the hype about the creative class. And on the design scene, we have things like critical design, the idea of using design to produce objects and scenarios that challenges status quo. It could be, for instance, in terms of the use of mobile devices, or it could do with climate or whatever. And something called speculative design, which is similar, but worked more towards actually building working prototypes together with users. It could be nurses, and it could be nuns in a cloister and trying to see new ways of prayer, etc. But the difference, maybe one can say, between critical and speculative is that the speculative try to open up new ways to use new technology, whereas the critical uses design to raise issues about status. And there's also more and more a focus on the everyday and the mundane, especially here in Malmö, and partly with colleagues in Lancaster, in the UK, and many other places. This is very much in focus. And as we'll see, very much also the idea of the makerspace, or in the making, or focusing on them in the making. To summarize what we did produce a book. Richard and I were among the editors, but the important thing is that there were a number of cases from 2000 and onwards in Malmö in cases of co-design. And they're not success stories. They're stories about trying to learn what are the challenges when you're doing this. Here's a film clip or a little film on that. So here you get the first introduction to the Malmö version of co-design.
Lite hiphop-musik här. Koppa hiphop. Sing det igen. Hella. Tarom session. Tarom session. Tarom session. Kom igen nu. Jag hör oss.
Levererar.
Men det finns ingen arabisk, vad är det för någonting?
Alla arabiska.
Finns det arabisk? Men det är inte arabisk musik kompis.
Du missar alla arabiska musik. Den vill veta hur digestiv låter. Han låter digestiv. Filmskoppa.
Vad tror du om detta är en grej att kunna göra framöver? Litar man på det?
Så, alltså, jag vet inte. Enligt min mening så har de redan lyckats. Liksom. Så det...
Men litar man på det om det bara kommer upp? Nu berättar jag ju för dig vad det var, men om du bara skulle få det i telefonen så?
Alltså rent sådär spontant liksom. Alltså, det får ju gärna... Men nu står det ändå massa sådana här... alltså någon databeskrivning. Man var lite rädd, undrar vad det är för någonting. Men man kunde få fram på skärmen. Det här är låt. Gratis låt. Vi skickar ut det på bussen. Liksom. Så hade nog många nappat på det kanske. Och det har varit nyfiken att liksom.
Sväng av till höger till en liten graffiti-tektur.
Jag vet vad det är, tror jag.
Graffiti-tektur. De ställer väl persian, hade vi inte rätt?
Det stod det på skylten.
Luxa sol persian.
Ja, visst.
Fan vad jobbiga de är. Ja. Vad sa Docentgatan, Leo? Var är Docentgatan?
Jag fick sån konstigt som vänta.
Läs det högt mannen.
Vänta.
Jag kan inte läsa. Jag tror det är inte det.
Jag fick ett till. En natt. på en väg efter en efterfest. Hamnade jag i en stad, jag var aspackad. Och spydde nästan på bussen dit. Förresten, vilken buss tog jag från Dalaplan? Svara på detta sms med en siffra. 8. Du vet var det kom från.
Vad var det?
Vad säger du?
Kom det där borta. Kolla, läs smset. Gå ner!
Det är ordet. Jag såg på stolpen när jag föll mot marken. När hon kommer in, kolla hon kommer in här, hon ser att folk hänger här. Hon snubblar och hon ser någonting här. Fattar du?
Det är ordet. När jag öppnade ögonen och det var hon, vilka 3 ord numrade jag till henne. Smsa orden, hej.
Nej.
3 ord? Jag älskar, kan man säga.
Jag älskar dig, man.
Tror du?
Ja, 3 ord när man säger det. Är det inte sant?
Det är bra.
Så sliskar vi.
Kolla på andra som
Välkommen. God morgon.
کم پخته کنیم کم وقت در بر میگیره زیاد پخته کنیم زیاد وقت در بر میگیره اگر کمتر پخته کنیم کمتر وقت در بر میگیره زیاد پخته کنیم زیاد وقت در بر میگیره باید سرغن انداخته شه و بعدا سرش با زود ایره تا بالا میکنیم که نسوزه کم پخته کنیم کم وقت در بر میگیره زیاد پخته کنیم زیاد وقت در بر میگیره
Ett halvår sedan ungefär var det väl. Så träffade jag Herrgårdens kvinnoförening genom Malmö högskola.
Och det kan ju hända jättespännande saker när människor som har helt olika idéer och tankar och bakgrund och ramverk möts. Om man är öppen för möjligheter. Och det är därför vi träffas idag för att se om det finns några idéer både i Herrgårdens kvinnoförening och i nätverket Göran.
Ska du ha ditt lilla blogg? Hej, jag heter Shirin Hamidi. Jag kan laga mat. Jag vill jobba på restaurangen. Först jag vill gå kurs laga mat.
När jag kom hit idag tidigt så pratade jag med Aisha och Gilla och Halima om att jag skulle så gärna vilja att föreningen kom ut och hälsade på mig på landet. För nu finns det ramslök i skogen och nässlor. Och man kom ut till mig och vi ordnade någon buss eller något. Och så träffades den gruppen där. Välkommen! God morgon! Ja, tack.
من بی تو به کجا بروم تو بی من به کجا بروی پروانه به کناری
Det är gratis. Det kostar inga pengar.
Det är 8 år kom var det dit Sverige bara idag jag plockar. Det är mycket glad jag är.
För dagen alltså, det är någon hopp. Alltså det är någon hopp, alltså det betyder att det finns något mål. Alltså när samhället blir beredd för att ta den här målgruppen för att eller använda som en resurs.
دل مرا افشان کن مرا پریشان کن مبادا یک شب در حواسی باشی مبادا روزی مالی کسی باشی اخوا ویلا لیلی دوست دارم خیلی تو لیلی من مجنون
شاخی من گل کن دل مرا افشان کن مرا پریشان کن مبادا یک شب در حواسی باشی نبادا روزی مالی کسی باشی اخوا ویلا لیلی دوست دارم خیلی.
So these were examples from the last decade of co-design projects and how they were approached by students and researchers here in Malmö, from this digital Bauhaus. And you can say that it's based on a quite uncommon model, even if it exists under places. And you could say it's a kind of living lab model, meaning that instead of a single project, it's to build alliances over time between different actors. So an expanding kind of network. And in this case, with us, Malmö Living Lab, of course there was students, teachers, researchers, and designers from the university. There were NGOs and also companies, typically media and digital companies, public institutions, and even business incubators involved in this. And as you've heard, not without complication, trying to have a strong link to the city of Malmö and civil servants and politicians there. And last but absolutely not least, to focus on working directly with active citizens. So instead of a project, this is an expanding network where part of what the co-designers are doing in this is trying to see opportunities of linking different actors, and sometimes with designers, students, researchers, sometimes without. But over time, trying to be supportive and jumping in where opportunities comes up. And we call this thinking or infrastructuring. The surrounding of all this happening is, well, this is now after 9/11. Neoliberalism is the clear ideology in most societies. But theoretically, there's a number of things happening. It's influences from what is called science and technology studies, and I'll come a little bit into that. There are new ideas on commons and governance. There are new feminist ideas of technoscience. There are new forms of design activism. Design anthropology becomes an important aspect into what's going on. And open design and free and liberal open software systems. And last but not least, adversarial design, which is the idea of taking controversies as something constructive in design. The theoretical model for this is in some way based on the old Nordic thing, or the Icelandic thing. The concept of the thing is a strange. It's strange how it's changed meaning over the years. In the beginning, as in the Icelandic thing, it meant an assembly to deal with issues of concern, with matters of concern, with controversies. You had to leave your weapons outside. You go in. You try to solve. To come to an agreement on controversial issues. So you can say, and this is in a way the basic form of the parliament. And then we can have many different forms of parliament, but this is the parliamentary side of the thing, the assembly. But the way we use it in common language today and how it's often understood is also that the thing is an object, something that is produced, something that designers are concerned with, giving form to. And this is also an aspect, so we're suggesting that what designers, especially co-designers, have to be concerned with is this flickering between both designing an object and an assembly. And it's not easy to understand which one comes first. They are really made up together. And it also says that an object that is designed does never exist in a vacuum. It's always produced in some ways, it's always opened up and used in some ways, so it's always in a mesh or a network of relations. So that's why there is a focus at the same time on producing the physical or digital output and at how to assembly around that while you're making it and afterwards, not least afterwards. How does this thing that you produce travel in different social and social settings? And when we design these things, we typically lean towards the laboratory or the design studio, where we have our tools and our materials and our practices of doing. So the practice that we're involved in here in co-design is, on the one hand, this flickering between assembly and object, but also between parliament, with making decisions, literally making decisions, with the parliamentary side of co-design and the laboratory side of exploring different alternatives, different materials, different ways of putting the object together. So in this book you will see some of these new trends without any solutions, as I said. And I think the book can be said to be divided into 4 areas, which are where we at the moment, or where we at that moment were moving in co-design. One has to do with what I here called opening production, with commons and commoning, and the idea of new ways of producing collaboratively and in the small, and what the challenges are to that. And you could say, maybe you could call the next area opening reproduction or designing conditions for the social. This is like several of the examples you saw in the film before. There will be examples of what one could call designing conditions for the social, engaging in social issues and trying to find new ways. And often, as in the title of this book, Marginal Notes on Innovation, Design and Democracy, is often engaging in the marginal, with the marginalized, in trying to explore these changes. We could also talk about opening government or making things public, as our preferred term is. And this has to do with how can, if we have this, I mean, today we have the dominant paradigm in governing in relation to production being new public management, the idea of measuring and optimizing according to measurements. It's been heavily criticized, and it's being heavily criticized in this book as well. It's also been criticized by those who invented the idea in the UK. But nevertheless, it's very much the dominant paradigm. So here is the question of how can design be part of democratizing democracy in the public sector? How can, for instance, can civil servants be designers, or can they only be bureaucrats? How can one find ways for new forms of meetings? We've even had example, and there's one of the cases in here, of the traditional sewing circle as a new way of, or as an old new way of meeting and trying to explore issues. So for the sewing circle, as it was used in these design experiments here by Åsa Ståhl and Christina Lindström, it's not so much about coming together to solve an issue or together, but coming together to find out what are the problems. What are the men talking about? Why? Maybe we have better ways of dealing with this. And finally, which is maybe a bit more complicated, we could talk maybe about open culture and what we, with a little pun here, have tried to call creative class struggles, and questioning what is the creative class, and for instance, what's happening at the margins of the creative class. Is the embracement of the creative class good for everyone, or who is excluded from that? And could one find ways, again, to work more in the margins? Maybe it's with with crowdsourcing, or it's in other ways where one can find possibilities to produce or for cultural production also in the marginal. And I think to save time, jump over these ones and look one step further ahead on this third collective turn. Now beyond, you could say, the kind of challenges that we saw here, and into what one maybe could call cosmopolitical design collectives. Quite a few designer and design researchers have started to be interested in a critique of the human-centric view on design. Are we sure that from the perspective of the globe, that the best way to design is to design what is good for humans, even at the price if it's if it's bad for the environment, for instance, or for other species, etc. So this has been called an invitation to engage with significant others, and here are examples where some of these early experiments were some of the young designers who are now also part of this have written their PhD books. For instance, in an elderly care center, how they try with technology to have a dialogue between the elderly people and the birds coming there. A magpie, for instance. The magpie has a camera and shows something about the surrounding to the people, and it gets more when it gets down to them and get food. And I mean, it's all very experimental, but in the sense to try to explore both new boundaries and who is part of the co-design, and can magpies be part of co-designing, for instance. And another aspect of this is what's been called the murmuring of the idiot, that sometimes when we co-design, there are actors that we don't take in because we basically think that they are idiots. And there's been good case made for that. It's actually could be quite good to listen to them, not least because it may slow down the process in the design and the decision-making process, and helping us thereby to make better decisions. It's a big issue right now. And of course, the idea of working more utopian and trying to see that could design, if we have the perspective that if things continues as business as usual, we have the apocalypse. And on the other hand, not many people seem to be interested in engaging in dramatically changing our behavior and ways of living, etc. What Anders is suggesting is that we should do some kind of speculative design, as we talked about, in the space between conventional development and the Great Transition. The Great Transition is what the Global Scenario Group, including the people up at the Environment Institute in Stockholm, are suggesting. So could we work with change within, as they suggest, planetary boundaries and social targets? How would such a utopian design look? Who do you engage with? Do you also engage with not only significant others and beyond human species? In general, can you start to design now for what is maybe, or unfortunately, unless we do much better, quite likely to happen? Could design start to work within that space between business as usual and the Great Transition, which might be necessary? And how big is the span? And all this talk about the 2% and how long time we have, etc. Could there be strategies where design, and especially co-design, could play an important role in that? So in this new landscape, maybe we can talk about the knowledge themes in ways where there are ideas of that design is not you do the object, the project, you're ready. It's something that is performative, ongoing and entangling in networks in most unforeseen ways. Of course, this Promethea sounds strange, but it's just to say, are there ways that where we can go beyond the human hybris of flying to the sun, and it's suggested that design actually can have a modest role in these kind of small experiments. There is this whole big theory of actor network theory. A little bit is said in the book about it. Our approach to it is basically to say, to turn it on its head, as Marx said about Hegel, by the way, to the idea that the controversies, they are not ideal controversies, they are real controversies. They have to jump in and be part of the real controversy. Designers cannot stand outside just mapping. They need to be part of the networks that are evolving. So in that sense, it's not something that you look at from outside, it's something that you are in and you're, as we said with Donald Schoen earlier, you're in the swamp, you're not on terra firma. You have to live with this uncertainty. There's been ideas around, which a little bit mentioned in here, about how we can take in much more from theater and the idea of the rehearsal and using that when we are designing. And it's partly anthropology. We have been talking about commoning versus the current version of platform capitalism as Google, etc. Making kin, not babies. There's even been suggested that it's time now not to make necessarily more babies, but focus more on making kins, on kinship. You see this idea of going beyond the human-centric. Staying with the trouble ideas, and instead of always trying to do the new, solve the next problem, stay with the trouble. Keep on working on something that doesn't dissolve and is solved very easily. Just keep on doing. And we have, you remember maybe in the film from '86, where I was very critical to artificial intelligence. Now the new kind of artificial intelligence with machine learning puts completely new challenges. If one should be for or against, I don't know, but it's a very, very different, and it seems to have big impacts on collective design. To the extent that maybe you could say that you collaborate with the algorithms of Google, where they actually are the ones that decide what you do. You don't have any free will anymore. That's one perspective on this. So that's my overview from 1918 to 2018, starting with, as we said, back with the Bauhaus and the post-First War ideas of now we want peace, no more war, and how can design work into that, to from '68 and onwards to the idea of democratizing the workplace, and that design could play a role in that, to further on that design actually could play a role in not only in the workplace and in people's life, not only to design good things for people, but also that people could be co-designers of their own thing. To new theories and ideas about collective design and how to understand technology in that perspective. On to a little bit of a detour, or maybe it's not a detour, maybe a little bit ethnocentric view on this school from '98 and until now, and some of the networks and ideas that different projects that has grown out of that, and into the current ideas of marginal and cosmopolitical design collectives. And one of these collectives that I did not mention, but there was a picture on it earlier on, is this one. Also surprising. It's one, you could say, maybe it's more critical design than co-design. It's again Åsa Ståhl and Christina Lindström, who read an article from Stanford University about that there were some kind of worms that actually could eat polyform plastic and digest that. So they started a project where they engaged people like in critical design projects and then gave them some worms and a bit of plastic, and they could then have them in their home, and then they could have this plastic dissolve and becomes into protein. So the second part of the project is, of course, and how can you then try to do dishes, delicious dishes out of this, and they tried experiments with that too. And so you can say that this is not our normal co-design project, but it's an example of that, and the one with the magpie and the elderly people tells something about how at the edge of co-design, how some kind of collective design avant-garde are trying to explore new possibilities beyond the human-centric. That's it from 1918 to 2018, and from now on until lunch, we go on from 2018 to as long as you decide, but let me suggest 2068, yes, in the next 50 years.